To all who come to this happy podcast, welcome. Welcome to This Happy Place, a Disney podcast. And this is the start of a marvelous journey. That is a pun intended, because we're going to be starting talking about every single movie, TV show, live action to come from the Marvel Cinematic Universe leading up to Avengers Doomsday. You might be saying, doesn't Avengers Doomsday come out December of next year? Well, yes it does. But the MCU has gifted us with so many projects that if we do about one a week from here until Doomsday, we will be covering everything. Now, I say not everything. We're going to not be talking about a couple of things. We may or may not talk about the What If animated show. We will see if we have time for that. We will not be talking about Deadpool and Wolverine just because I haven't seen that movie, and Deadpool is not necessarily a character that I enjoy, but we are going to be talking about all the TV shows except for Daredevil Born Again, because once again, Daredevil is not necessarily a character or the type of show I enjoy very much, but we're going to talk about all the mainstream MCU movies, TV shows, and this is going to be a wondrous time. 2008 was the start of it all, and I can't remember the first time that I saw Iron Man. It was sometime after the Avengers came out in 2012 when I really started to get into Marvel, specifically the MCU. Growing up, apart from Spider-Man, I was always a DC kid. Every action figure I had was DC. Lego Batman video games ran supreme, and the Batman and Superman animated show was the majority of what I watched. I was also young when Iron Man came out. I was 8 years old. I wasn't cognitive of what movies were coming out. I wasn't worried about what was in theaters the same way I am today. That's why the 2012 Avengers is the moment in time I can look back on when I started caring about when Marvel movies were coming out. Avengers wasn't my first MCU movie I saw in theaters. That award goes to Thor, but I was invited by a friend to go see Thor. It wasn't something that was on my radar. So it was sometime after the Avengers where I got a copy of Iron Man from a neighbor or the library, I can't remember, and I watched it for the first time. I can't remember what I thought of it. I can't remember if I liked it. I can't remember if I liked it as much then as I do today. Before we get into what I think, let's take a look at what other people thought about it when it first came out. Before this, the concept of a shared cinematic universe was relatively unheard of. Of course, there were crossovers, but nothing as ambitious as what the MCU eventually turned out to be. But let's take a look at some reviews from 2008. It's currently holding a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes, so right out of the gate, people seem to really appreciate the movie. The legendary Roger Ebert was able to review this movie, and he gave it 4 out of 4 stars. He rated his movies on a 4-star scale. And he said it was essentially a perfect movie. He said, at the end of the day, it's Robert Downey Jr. who powers the liftoff of separating this from most other superhero movies. Well, right off the bat, it was pretty clear that there was something special about the RDJ casting as Tony Stark. Frank Lovesey from Newsday said, despite several adrenaline-pumping moments, Favreau and Downey stay focused on the real story, about a man learning to take responsibility for his actions. For all its firepower and CGI slickness, that's what really makes Iron Man fly. A negative review comes from Kenneth Turin, and he says, quote, unlike the irreducible element that is its namesake, Iron Man the movie is an alloy, a combination of several different and disconnected components that don't manage to unite to make a coherent whole, end quote. But with a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes, there isn't a lot of negative reviews out there. Since it is the beginning of the MCU, and since the MCU is the name in comic book movies today, I wouldn't blame you for thinking that Iron Man was the first big superhero movie of the decade. However, what we need to remember is that before this release, there were 3 X-Men movies, 3 Spider-Man movies, and Batman Begins, and then Dark Knight also came out later in 2008. So Iron Man didn't necessarily break new ground in the comic book genre by being a comic book movie. It broke ground by being the first movie in a one-of-a-kind cinematic universe. Throughout its theatrical run, it grossed a total of $585.79 million at the box office, which is very respectable. Other movies of the first of its franchise. Above it made less than it, except for the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie. Batman Begins and X-Men made $375 and $296 million respectively, so it was obvious that Iron Man was something special and the start of something special. Don't let anyone tell you ever that Iron Man doesn't hold up. It holds up in every way you look at it. Let's start talking about the obvious, that is the typical thing that most everyone takes away with Iron Man, and that is Tony Stark himself, Robert Downey Jr. There are not a lot of acting performances that I say the actor is the character, but RDJ is Tony Stark. He is the definition of perfect casting. When Iron Man inevitably gets recast, nothing is official yet. I'm just saying that I think he is going to be at some point. That person is going to have big shoes to fill. But why do we love RDJ's performance as Tony Stark? Well, there are several elements that RDJ brings to the character that I feel really sets him up for development down the road. The development of the character is so well done from beginning to end. At the first, he is your typical playboy millionaire philanthropist, selfish, only worried about himself, and not having a care to the world. RDJ has such a good grasp on that sense of self-absorption that you almost hate him at first, and when he gets captured, it's hard to root for him. But it's at the moment after his Humvee blows up that he looks at a missile right next to him, about to go off, and that missile has the Stark logo on it. It's in that instant where you see the slightest look on Tony's face that he is guilty and he knows that he was responsible for his own kidnapping, but RDJ portrays that so well. So at that moment at the press conference where he announces that Stark Enterprise is shutting down the weapons division, you really see what Tony's thought process is. He doesn't want to be responsible for destruction. At the core of who he is, he wants to do good, which is an important element of his character, especially when we were talking about Age of Ultron. That movie, this point gets brought up again. But throughout the movie, Tony still acts like a jerk, just like a typical playboy. But there's always just a subtle undertone that RDJ brings to the role where you always feel that Tony has such a desire to do good and he's scared to admit it to those around him. At the end, when he declares himself Iron Man, he does that from a place of look how cool I am, but you also know that he is also doing it from a place of wanting to protect others. He created the Mach 1 suit to escape his captors, and he creates suits from here on out to help protect others. Yes, there is an element of wanting to look cool, but RDJ does such a good job at making sure we see both parts of Tony's personality. Let's briefly talk about the other actors in this movie. Really, the other main ones worth mentioning are Gwyneth Paltrow as Pepper Potts and Jeff Bridges as Obadiah Stane, but let's talk about Bridges first. Bridges is an amazing actor. At the point of Iron Man releasing, he had around 4 Academy Award nominations, but now he has 7 with 1 win. And I think it was a good idea to bring in a very reputable, respectable actor to portray the villain in this first movie. The character of Obadiah Stane doesn't have a lot to do in the movie. There isn't a lot of substance to this role. And I feel like there could have been a lot of actors that would have done just as great of a job as Bridges. But Bridges is what we got, and he delivered a very satisfying performance. One of his quotes is still quoted to this day, which is, "Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a bunch of scraps." Which I do want to point out real quick, Tony did have slightly more than a box of scraps when he built the first Iron Man suit and the first arc reactor. But Gwyneth Paltrow was great as Pepper. She has this chemistry with RDJ that stands second to none when it comes to my favorite romantic relationships in the MCU. I don't know what about it is so charming, but I kind of wanted more of RDJ and Gwyneth Paltrow. I think the main reason I like the character of Pepper is that she's able to be quick-witted with Tony. Not a lot of people can be, but Pepper can keep up. Towards the beginning of the movie, when Pepper gives the girl that spent the night with Tony her dry cleaning, you do see a glimmer of disappointment and sadness. You tell immediately that Pepper wants Tony and is pained every time she sees him doing Tony things, but from the beginning, you are rooting for this relationship to work. Even the moment when Tony steps foot into America again, coming off of the plane, you see the pain wash away from Pepper's face, and the expression turns into one that is like exhaustive relief. You can tell that Pepper was worrying about Tony for a long time, and you can tell that she really does care for Tony. The next thing I want to bring up is the CGI. This movie came out in 2008, meaning that some of the visual effects were probably done sometime in 2007, and they look really good. Specifically, the special effects dealing with his suit. The effects were so effective in making the suit look and behave in a way that enhanced your emotion while watching Iron Man. There have been movies when the effects for the main character are poor and it immediately takes you out of the moment. But they nail it pretty much every single time in this movie. I don't say every time because there is one moment that is brief when we see Obadiah Stane in the big Ironmonger suit at the end with the head lifted up, and it does look kind of janky, and I think that is mainly due to the combination of a live-action actor with a CGI suit around him. But when we see the Iron Man suit in heavy action, we don't really see RDJ. We do in the sense of a close-up of his face inside the mask, but not really a full body shot. From the first moment he breaks out of the cave to his first test flight to the scene where he saves hostages in the Middle East and fighter jets chase him, it's always well done. The suit always shows a sense of wear and battle scars. Apart from the suit, I have no complaints about the CGI. It was really well done, and I think another way to look at it is this. I know there were practical effects done when making this film. You can look up behind the scenes footage and see that there were indeed some practical elements of the suit. But I'm not sure when the practical ended and when the visual effects started. When you can't tell where the line in that is, you can know that the visual effects artists are doing a really good job. If I were to describe this movie with one word, that would be a hard thing to do, but I would probably pick the word fun. Let's run through the moments in which I felt like this movie was fun. Perhaps my favorite scene of the movie is when Tony built the Mach 1 Iron Man suit and escapes captivity. From the start of the moment where Jensen starts the computer to boot up the suit, you instantly know that crap is about to hit the fan. Jensen, in a life-defying moment, goes out to buy Tony more time, and then in an almost boogeyman or slasher horror film type of way, they film this scene. The birth of Iron Man is treated like he is a monster, which in a way is symbolic of his thoughts about himself being responsible for all these weapons that are being used for destruction. But he is now using them to destroy them. I love the moment where they are shooting at him and stop, and he just responds with, "My turn," and just lights everything up. This is my favorite movie scene of the movie, and we will see as we go on this MCU journey, but it might be one of my favorite scenes in the MCU. Someone watching Iron Man for the first time today may look at the final fight scene and be a little underwhelmed. After all, the scene takes place in a relatively small area of Los Angeles and only involves two people. There are no evil minion robots. There are no teams of superheroes attacking each other. It's just a classic hero versus villain scene. It's small scale, but remember, this is the first movie of a franchise. This scene is fun too. I'm usually not a fan of when the villain is just a mirror opposite of the hero. This villain is just a big Iron Man suit, which I got to admit, one of my few nitpicks of the movie, but the fight scene is, again, really fun. There are callbacks to what Tony learned earlier in the movie, and a classic, while overused moment of thinking the villain is dead, only for them to return for one last showdown. In retrospect, it is kind of funny to look back on this fight scene, specifically the moment where Tony was going to sacrifice himself to kill one person in a suit. Was what Obadiah doing with Stark Industries terrible? Of course it was. But when you compare it to how or what Tony sacrificed himself for in Avengers Endgame, it's kind of fun to see how his first appearance and last appearance, there was something to do with sacrificing himself. Tony is a better person than he ever let on, almost feeling embarrassed to show the world he is a good person at heart. Pepper even sees this, proven by the gift she gives Tony that later saves his life. The old arc reactor that says, proof that Tony Stark has a heart, which also is a great, in Avengers Endgame, that just provides a great callback, but we'll get to that down the road. Some other things I want to mention that I haven't yet is Terrence Howard was great as Colonel James Rhodey Rhodes. I do wish that we could have seen what he would do with the character, knowing where Rhodey ended up now, but we did get Don Cheadle, and I'm never going to complain about getting more Don Cheadle on my screen. I enjoy him as a performer. If you haven't watched Hotel Rwanda, go do yourself a favor. It is a hard watch, but he is excellent in that movie. You can also tell that the filmmakers knew how much care they had for this movie, knowing what it could become. All filmmakers have care for their project, but it's always special when you can fill that care with something extra. Sometimes I just watch a movie and recognize that all parts come together, but it lacks heart. I don't know what it is in this movie, but you can feel it when there was maybe a little extra heart poured into a project. Jon Favreau is a great creative, and I'm so glad that he made Iron Man work. Iron Man is, right now, on top of my MCU movie ranking, not only because it's the only movie on the list, but because it deserves it. Thank you for listening to this first episode of Dealing with the MCU on This Happy Place, a Disney podcast. Thank you for listening once again, and remember, there is a great, big, beautiful tomorrow shining at the end of every day.